We're kicking off this look back at 2015 with a man who's now been in office almost a year. In that time, he's become the most popular governor in America. Now, in researching this segment, we discovered two things. One, I'm the only person in the state with whom Governor Baker has not taken a selfie. In fact, here he is with our makeup artist in the green room just moments ago. Second thing we found, it appears most of his big issues in 2015 will remain his high priorities for 2016. We'll see if he agrees. The governor joins me now. Governor, it's good to see you.
How are you?
Since we know you're short on time, what I decided to do, I'd sum up what your major issues were in advance. I actually put
I really
them on the screen.
appreciate that, Jim.
My pleasure. You want to take a look at this?
Sure.
And tell me, is this sort of this covers the major six. Is that a safe assumption? Major
That's
issues?
a pretty good list.
Okay.
Yep, as my wife would say, that's a good list.
So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pick a couple, and then in the spirit of the holidays, you're going to pick one or two that you want to talk about that I didn't. Let's start with the T, since everybody's focused. Snow disaster almost immediately after you take over. Green Line extension over budget, assuming there is a budget. Monday, you're on with Janet Wu on Channel 5. Here's what you said. I don't believe the case has been made for fair hikes at all, but I do believe we shouldn't take any options off the table. Next day, two guys making 300 grand at the T, a quarter of them making more than 100 grand. If you couldn't justify a fair hike on Monday, how can your financial control board justify a 10% fair hike 2 days later?
Well, I think the big issue, as I said, is you can't take anything off the table. And I think a big part of first of all, I love the fact that we have a Fiscal and Management Control Board, and the T, which operated behind a curtain and out of public view forever, every week is having a meeting to talk about logistics, operations, capital planning, financial budgeting. It's all there. It's probably the most transparent we've ever been with something that covers services every day for 1 million people in Massachusetts. But as I've said, I don't think we should take anything off the table. I think everything should be part of the conversation. And I think there's a big proof point here that the T needs to live up to.
How could you go to the taxpayers and say, that guy worked thousands of hours of overtime, made 300 grand, a quarter of them are making 100 grand while you're working at 40 or whatever, and by the way, I want to raise your fares 10%.
No, we need to, I talked to the folks at the T about this yesterday, and we need to take a look at what's going on there, and we're going to. I mean, we have an absenteeism issue, too, that was left over from last winter, as well as a whole series of other management issues.
How much of this is Governor Patrick's fault, do you think?
I'm not looking to assess blame one way or the other. I don't see any point or purpose in it. What I do see is, thankfully, the legislature gave us a series of tools we were looking for and created that control board, which created the possibility of having a transparent reform process that everybody's going to get a chance to participate in.
Did it aggravate you when he said on TV this week, after a year in office, it's probably time for the governor, meaning you, to take responsibility for solutions?
He's a voter in Massachusetts, Jim. He can say whatever he wants. What I will say is that the registry, which used to have 3 or 4 hour waiting time, now has basically everybody getting through in less than 30 minutes. That's a solution. And the Health Connector, which has been a complete disaster for hundreds of thousands of people in Massachusetts for the past few years, has been open enrollment now for a month and hasn't had a single blip.
Okay, one last thing on the T. I want to quote you. I do believe we shouldn't take any option
hate it when you keep
off the
quoting
table.
me.
Here it is. No option off the table. Marty Walsh, the mayor, told Marjorie Egan and me on the radio last week, we need taxes to fix the T. Steve Lynch, congressman, said the same thing. Based on this, I do believe we shouldn't take any option off the table. Should taxes be off the table?
Let's fix the T first, and then we can have a conversation about all these issues. You just walked me through a whole series of issues that points out many of the significant operational and management challenges that we have to wrestle with first.
But that's not an unequivocal no, is it?
It's pretty close to an unequivocal no.
Fair hikes, yes, but taxes, no?
The big issue with this, well, keep in mind, we raised taxes. We raised the gas tax several years ago, and a big piece of that went to the T. The other thing I would say about that is we have $1 billion now every year from the taxpayers who never ride the T that go to finance and support the T's operation. I was in Western Mass yesterday for the entire day. It's one of the things a lot of people brought up to me over and over again. You know, I'm paying all kinds of taxes to support something I'm never going to use. When are you guys going to get around to fixing it?
Second on my list from your 6, opioids. You've been laser-like in the focus, filed legislation, most of which the legislature didn't act on. As a citizen, my attitude is the legislature is fiddling while Massachusetts burns. Is that an unfair characterization of their inaction here?
I get the fact that they have to come up with 81 votes in the House and 21 votes in the Senate and then agree on whatever each branch passes. And I get the fact that I put some pretty controversial stuff in there. But I also believe you can't break the status quo on this by screwing around on the edges. If you really want to create prevention and education and intervention solutions and create treatment and recovery solutions, you have to be willing to try different things and new approaches. And I think our legislation has a lot of that in it. But I'm very hopeful. I'm going to talk a lot about this in my State of the State. It may end up being one of the most important things in my State of the State. I want the legislature to deal with this early when they come back. I mean, since the hearing on November 17th that Mayor Walsh and I testified together at in support of our bill, first time, by the way, a sitting mayor of Boston and a sitting governor have ever done that, over 100 people have died of opioid overdoses in Massachusetts. I mean, this thing is screaming for immediate response. One final thing.
Sure, of course.
In fairness to the legislature, they did give us a down payment on this. They gave us $28 million in prevention and education and treatment support in the final supplemental back in the fall.
We're not going to get to all six. Charters, hydro, Department of Children and Families budget. You pick one.
Department of Children and Families.
What are you doing?
We have a whole series of initiatives that we're pursuing in conjunction, by the way, with the labor union that represents the social workers, Local 509. They've been terrific on this stuff. They're very interested in real solutions and policies that are going to protect kids. And the two big ones straight out of the gate here is the intake and investigation process, which has been completely broken and has a lot to do with many of the tragedies that have become all too familiar to us. And the DCF, for the first time, has a supervisory policy, which it never had before. We have a ton of stuff left to do there. I wish I could just put the whole thing on pause until we get it all implemented. But this is one that, you know, as a father of 3 kids, I really want to see us make major progress on.
I'm going to add a very quick budget question, if I may, from that list. You've said we actually have the same position on direct democracy and ballot questions. People vote in their wisdom. You made your case. They voted to lower the income tax. It's been slowed down. You're going to lose $152 million this year by honoring
75 this year.
Oh, pardon me, 152
next year.
Next year, by honoring their mandate. At the same time, we read in the paper this morning, you can have $1 billion deficit, which means service cuts. You're going to stick with the honoring of that $152 million loss in revenue?
Look, I think the voters made a decision a long time ago, and the legislature chose to pursue that decision, but on a completely different path. And I don't think we should break faith with the voters on this. And by the way, we started last year with a $1.8 billion deficit and managed to find solutions to deal with that problem, working very collaboratively with our colleagues in the House and Senate. And I expect we'll be able to do that again.
There was some fiscal trickery, though, the rainy day budget and that sort of thing.
We put $150 million into the rainy day fund.
But you also took a lot out of it, did you?
No,
not?
we didn't.
Not in this last year?
No. Okay, so the issue there is the legislature and the governor several years ago passed legislation that said they would any amount of capital gains tax revenue over a certain amount that came in would automatically go to the rainy day fund. All right, that didn't happen to the full extent that it should have in this fiscal year or in last fiscal year. We need to get to the point where that does happen because we need to replenish the fund.
Thanks for clarifying that. I know one of your favorite topics is being asked about Donald Trump, so why not? I know you're not going to answer the questions.
I never get asked about him.
I know I don't. I know you're not wasting. And I think people know where you are, even though you won't say it. But when you say things, I heard you say to John Keller the other night, a very funny exchange, by the way, I should say. You said, you know, people didn't elect me to be picking presidents and doing politics.
No, they didn't.
I would respectfully disagree. You're the one who said, I want an Obamacare waiver from the President of the United States. You're the one that wanted tens of millions of dollars from the federal government for storm relief. Who sits in that chair, in great part, affects how well you do your job. So don't you owe it to the people to say he or she is the best one for us, in my estimation?
I think, first of all, it's so early. No one has voted in anything.
Correct.
No one's voted in a caucus. No one's voted in a primary. We have a really long way to go as far as all of this stuff is concerned. And I think it's really important. I mean, to some extent, I think it's important for me to follow up on your comment to stay relatively uninvolved in that stuff. Whoever sits in that chair needs to be somebody who my administration can work with on all kinds of issues, whether it's snow relief or health care or transportation or whatever it happens to be.
You're going to tell us who you're voting for before March 1st when Massachusetts votes?
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. The last thing. 5 years ago.
That wasn't on the list, by the way.
5 years ago, you were in the radio studio doing a debate with Deval Patrick and Tim Cahill. Those are the three, right? In the middle of the debate, you slammed the desk. And the headline in the Globe the next day was, "Is he too angry to be governor?" And then all of a sudden, there's like a metamorphosis. We mentioned the selfie thing. I'm serious. You seem totally comfortable, totally relaxed, almost never angry publicly. I'm serious about this. What caused that, at least public transformation?
I think, first of all, there's no question I learned a lot from the race in 2010. And my wife and I have talked about this, and Lauren and I both think that if I hadn't run in 2010 and lost and learned from that, I never would have won in 14. And the other thing that happened was many of my friends and coworkers said they never saw the Charlie Baker that they saw every day during that campaign. And you know, that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I went back and watched a lot of the video and listened to a lot of it, and it was very clear to me that I think of myself as a pretty approachable, reasonable guy who likes to hear multiple points of view, brought up by two people who used to debate the issues without being disagreeable. And for whatever reason in 2010, that wasn't the guy that ran for governor. And one of the things Lauren and I said about 14 was win or lose, we wanted to make sure the voters saw the person that we see every day.
So this is the real one?
God, I hope so. It's the only one I got.
You've been very
Hey,
generous with your time.
Happy
this year,
holidays
Governor.
and
Thanks
Happy
so
New
much.
Year. Okay.
Really appreciate it.